I'd like to welcome Mr. CJ Kirk to Krav Life. Welcome, sir. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. And so you're located in Houston, correct?
That's correct, yes.
All right. Now, how did you get, have you always been in Krav Maga or did you start in a different martial art? How did you get started?
That's a good question. I grew up doing more traditional martial arts, Muay Thai, which is essentially Taekwondo.
Mhm.
Through college, I did Jin Fan or Jeet Kune Do, and that was when the UFC and the Jiu-Jitsu craze started. I did for several years of Jiu-Jitsu as well.
Nice.
I was 20, 24, 25, 24. I was living here in Houston at the time and was robbed at gunpoint
Oh, wow.
and realized I didn't have a solution for that type of an encounter. And the aftermath of that robbery, I started looking for something that was more geared towards the types of threats we face in the world today.
Mhm.
And I realized, interestingly enough, that I've been engaging in sort of some sort of martial fantasy. Like, it's not like I didn't know people weren't robbed at gunpoint, right?
Right.
But somehow I decided that what I was doing was self-defense. It just wasn't, right? There's self-defense, and there are traditional martial arts, and there's fighting, and those three things are different. And I learned that the hard way.
Right. All right. And then where did you get involved with Krav Maga for the first time?
Yeah, I had initially seen videos out of Krav Maga Worldwide. I think it was Krav Maga Association of America at the time, and signed up for their instructor course, and went there in, I want to say 1997, and went through their Phase A course. And I was woefully unprepared for that, but that's another story.
Yep. All right. All right. And then, so you did the course, and when did you start? When did that transition into teaching Krav Maga?
Not long after, I had gone with an acquaintance of mine who had opened an Hapkido dojo, and he saw the promise of Krav Maga as well, and the application for real world violence, and he was very much excited about it as well. So I started teaching there probably 3 or 4 months after my phase training.
Okay. And then did you eventually strike out on your own to teach, or do you still teach out of another studio? What's
Yeah,
what are you doing now?
that's a good question. I would say we were there at that Hapkido studio for a couple of months, and my acquaintance went back into the Army and was deployed overseas, and his facility was shut down. And so I looked for another facility to take Krav Maga into. I found that facility. We were there for about a year, and then the investor of that facility shut that facility down because there was some embezzling going on that had nothing to do with what we were doing. Yeah,
Okay.
so the general manager was not doing what he was supposed to. And at that point, I just I called Worldwide and said, this is kind of silly. And I asked if I could assume the license for this territory. And that eventually happened, and I opened a school above a gym with a pole right in the middle of it, and about 600 square feet, and we've just been growing ever since. Now I have 3 locations.
Okay, so 3, and are they all in Houston?
They are, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So you have 3 locations, and do you plan on growing it to more locations, or it's 3 pretty much where you want to stay?
Yeah, that's a good question. We had looked at the barrier to growth, as you probably realize, in Krav Maga is growing and supporting high level instructors. And if you don't have, a whole basket full of high-level instructors, in my view, it's not worth, for a long time, my view was it's not worth opening a school.
Right.
My thinking has evolved over the years. And now I think what we're doing is we have two locations, one that's up and running and one that's going to be up later this year. And they are the models for a franchise concept where I have a corporate university in Houston
Mm-hmm.
that brings instructors in and teaches, but also allows the franchise and the franchisee to meet and to train and ensure that the business practices are embedded in the franchise as well. So that's sort of the vision. Yeah.
Interesting. Now, is this still under Krav Maga Worldwide, or is this out on your own or different organization?
I'm very low, very loyal to Krav Maga Worldwide. I would say 8 or 9 years ago, I started really developing a friendship with Darren Levine, who's the U.S. chief instructor.
Yep.
And just tremendous practitioner, probably an even better teacher. And we've just been, building that relationship. My kids call him Uncle Darren at this point. So he's
nice.
He's been around. He's a tremendous and wonderful person, and typically going to just affiliate wherever he finds himself.
Okay, perfect. And so, as you develop this training model, right, for your franchise, and is the training of the instructors, like, are you accepting like instructors that aren't from Krav Maga, or are you solely trying to train or retrain just Krav Maga instructors?
My feeling on that is we would be able to obviously reorient Krav Maga instructors to teach the curriculum in the way that we want to teach in the franchise. But I also think there's a pretty big opportunity to take personal trainers and people that want to be involved in more than just the physical training aspects of fitness, and to allow them to develop their body awareness, which doesn't always happen, but can happen through Krav Maga. If you've ever done an intro class, you know that sometimes the fittest people, the muscle up people come in and it's just a disaster. I mean, just getting a fighting stance and shifting weight is a disaster. Great body awareness, and we're looking for those people to teach them Krav Maga.
Okay. All right. And so your studios isn't the only thing that you do. You also have some side projects. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Well, I would say the schools are the main focus, but I do have a firm or a company called GZ TAC, and we do tactical shooting, primarily pistol-oriented shooting, although we have other courses. And that evolved out of a sense of my going to several different trainings and shooting pistols for decades, and not feeling like I was getting the kind of answers I wanted from the instructors. I'll give you an example. It was an LA shooting with a former SWAT operator and captain, a legendary guy. And he said to the group, you can't shoot without your sights. So you can't point shoot. And I thought to myself, hold on, I can take a bow and arrow without sights and hit a target. I can throw a ball downfield to somebody who's running and hit them. I can throw a ball to a mitt. So why can't I use that same sort of, you think of as estimation skill to point a gun, particularly if I can grip the gun and present the gun in a way that mirrors the way I point my finger. And what I sort of found in my research is that human beings are very good at pointing their fingers at things and being almost dead on. And it's a biological thing that comes out of being a baby and not being able to talk, and understanding that you could kind of point to something, but if you point to the wrong thing, you don't get the food, you get a toy. But when you're hungry, there's a huge biological motive to get to the food. And so that kind of power that comes out of that biological need can be harnessed in what we think of as combat shooting, which is close range shooting inside 20 yards and often inside 20 feet.
Oh, nice. And is this like an actual, like, do you own a site, like a range, or do you like rent one, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I own an outdoor range.
Okay.
It has a covered area on it, and we have a lodge there as well. So we typically go out. The lodge sleeps 18 people. We never take more than 12 on the line at a time. And we start with very basic stuff like presenting the pistol and dry firing. We move from there, and over a 2-day course, it's amazing what people can do if they build their foundation the way that we're describing. So probably the first hour or two of the class, we go through the concepts of grip and presentation, specifically for a pistol, and help people to understand at a more detailed level specifically what they're doing and why they're doing it. And then we do this in Krav too, we make them prove it to themselves. Right. From being a Krav instructor, if somebody says to you, does this work? You can say yes. But if they have a lingering question or they don't prove it to themselves, and the technique is a knife threat from the front, that person, when presented with that threat, is unlikely to do the defense because of those lingering questions, right? So we're always asking people to ask us questions, and we're always asking people to prove it to themselves, so that if the time comes or when the time comes, there's nothing stopping them from exploding into their technique or their defense.
Nice. And so this, so do you plan on tying the two together, like your Krav studios and your shooting company?
Well, we do in a way already. Once someone graduates from our level 1, level 2 basic or combat pistol course, and they're proficient and safe in handling their pistol, we'll typically go to a cert gun or a training gun, and we begin to show them how to fight to their weapon. One of the biggest mistakes people make when they carry a weapon, usually concealed, is when they're confronted by violence, they tend to want the gun to solve the problem, right? And the truth is, if you're confronted by violence, you often have to fight to your weapon, right? So you have to earn the right to make the space to get to your weapon, to take safe control of the scene, right? And so there are a number of modules that we teach around that as well. So the integration of Krav Maga and a weapon on your body, which is both an asset and a liability, right? How to deal with a weapons attached when you have a weapon on your body, right? And some of that has come from advanced force training out of the worldwide force curriculum. And some of it is just stuff that we've added on to over the years. But yeah, we have those modules available.
Oh, nice. And do you do like law enforcement as well? Like, do you train
We
there?
do. A lot of the law enforcement that is trained comes to our open classes. And if an agency wants training, we'll typically call a line, and John Pascal typically will handle that. You probably know that there are growing concerns about use of force and the force continuum and what law enforcement is being taught. And rather than be associated with the type of training that needs to happen to comply with all those issues, we just call John and ask him if he wants to come train this group. For instance, Harris County, the county we're in, often uses John as a primary trainer.
Okay. All right. And now because you have your plans to franchise the studio side, can you sort of see the same thing happening with the gun training?
So I haven't thought about that, to be frank with you.
Okay.
That's something that I think would be possible, but not probable. But we certainly would train other trainers in that system and curriculum and allow them to go and license and train people.
Okay.
But I don't think we would franchise.
And so, um, um, in Houston, right? Like a lot of areas around the country and the world are seeing upticks in violence and violent situations. Are you finding that in Houston as well? Because I know like Texas has always been more open, right? Like it's like Florida, isn't it? Where you guys have opened everything up, and did that is that relieving a lot of the stress versus places like California, which only just recently opened?
No, I don't think so. I would say that Texas is a lot like Florida and how you described that.
Mm-hmm.
There was more liberal and more quickly opened as a result of a rejection of some of the COVID-19 hysteria.
Mm-hmm.
However, Texas is not everybody carries a gun or knife. That's not really true. And I think the thing that's driving crime, both in Texas, specifically in Houston, and other areas, are the policies of the local DAs around bail and whether or not they're actually willing to um, charge people with crimes. And we have a DA in Houston that's my understanding that has instituted essentially a $10 bail policy or program. So for crimes that aren't really overtly violent, criminals just go back out on the street. There's probably a number of reasons for that, but the reasons aren't as important as the net effect, which is that violence is up in virtually every urban area that I'm aware of. And it's one of the very most important things people can do is recognize that and recognize this. If you walk around the earth since the beginning of time, there are certain life skills you cannot go without. And if you do, you risk everything. And so those things could be reading, writing, arithmetic, but they could also include self-defense. And that's something we preach every day
Mm-hmm.
at the schools here in Houston.
So what is your main focus at the school? Like, so you have someone new coming in, and you're going to be teaching them. What do you start with? Like what sort of philosophy do you start with new students?
Great question. So one of the things that I really think is important for new students is to understand both the forest and the trees, right? So get the big picture and understand what they're looking at any one time. So we have an intro class that we run, introductory class. And the introductory class is designed to teach a couple simple motor skills, right? So rotation will be one, reaching for a cup to as a proxy for a punch, and then rotating and reaching as if you're reaching as far as you can to grab a cup and you can't step forward, right? That type of thing. The pluck and the basic striking elements that I just discussed. So when you put those together, you can put a handgun under somebody's chin. You can have them pluck with one hand, rotate with the other, strike, and then take the gun. And so what we do is we build essentially 3 to 4 motor skills in intro class. And we talk about how Krav Maga uses these motor skills interchangeably in the same way that I could dump a box of Legos on the floor. You can make, hundreds of thousands of different things with those same Legos. Well, in Krav Maga, we make, 300 things, and they're different defenses. And the idea is for them to understand from the beginning that the motor skills you're learning are going to be used over and over and over again. So you're never going, once you get through level 1, ostensibly, you're not going to run into a movement that doesn't include one of the motor skills you already know. And so using that as the leverage to learn the new skill is important, because we want people to always be familiar with what they're doing before they do it.
Nice. So you mentioned that you mentioned one of the motor skills. What are just a couple of the other ones that you require your brand new students to have?
Yeah, in intro class we do rotation, and we do rotation with the arm movement to then teach a basic strike. right?
Mhm.
Then we teach the pluck. We teach it two hand and one hand, okay? And then we teach what we call the waiters tray carry. So what we do is we say, okay, who's been a well, what we first say is, who's been a waiter? And like three people raise their hand. They go, okay, so everybody else here is, you know, at least been in a restaurant and told a waiter what they wanted. They say, oh yeah. So say, when you go get a tray as a waiter or a waitress, you put your elbow in your body like this right here, and you hold the tray, right? And with your body, you lift and turn the tray like this, right? And so we have them do that. And I say, instead of going to the outside, just do this, right? Just like you're turning the tray. So we teach them a palm strike from below, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then when the gun is located under the chin, they pluck and rotate and strike and then get the gun. So they take those motor skills, and then at the end, the crescendo, the intro class is teaching them, see these basic, really basic movements create high risk violence, right? And so if they can just get that, if they can understand that in an hour and a half, I can learn more about Krav Maga, I can learn the principles, I can understand the concept of the hockey stick danger, graphs, which is you have to resolve the situation under 5 seconds, because after 5 seconds, you get the hockey stick graph where the risk of you being killed or hurt in a way that affects your quality of life is dramatically higher for every second after that.
Mhm.
If we can lay the foundation for them and help them understand the context of self-defense, and then show them these motor skills and help them understand how to use those motor skills in a way that's powerful, in an hour and a half, they go, oh my God, I get it now. Because we want everybody that engages in Krav Maga to have a firm sense of what we do and why we do it and how we get there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the intro class in a nutshell.
Yes, I like that. I like the analogy of the Lego blocks, and it's just it is what Krav Maga is supposed to be. It's supposed to be simple movements that you can apply to various situations. It's not supposed to be. We're not supposed to have 200 self defenses and 200 different ways of doing things, right?
Absolutely.
Because that just adds unnecessary complication to our self defense, because we just want to be safe, right? So the simpler, the better.
Absolutely.
So because of that, do you focus more on gross motor skills than fine motor skill movements?
Yeah, I think I'll tell people in intro class that for the most part, you can count 30 to 40 motor skills, gross motor skills in Krav Maga.
Mhm.
And I can say, what could you do with 40 Legos? You could build anything. So I said, once you learn those 40 motor skills, you're able to complete pretty much all of the defenses through black belt, right? And so then we give them the experience of doing some motor skills and turning it into a high risk defense. The other thing I think that's super important, and you were touching on, is this concept of performing with gross motor skills, which kind of is harkening to the idea that you're performing under stress, and that's what you have available to you. And we're very clear with our students that you lose up to about 50 IQ points under stress, right? So even if you're more intelligent than average, you're probably operating like a clinically retarded person,
Yeah.
as a factual statement, right? You lose visual tracking. You can end up with tunnel vision. You can have auditory exclusion. And so we describe that as a turd event, which may be a little bit crass, but they remember it as TURD. It's tense, uncertain, rapidly evolving, and debilitating physically and mentally, right? TURD. So they get the idea. So I have to use gross motor skills because the part of the brain that's operating that's what it can do for me, right? And so we want to be clear with students. We're not trying to teach 1,000 techniques like you alluded to. In fact, we'll say, if you have 1,000 techniques, you probably have a defense for choke from the front when the hands are extended, and when the arms are bent, and when the arms are really bent, and when one hand's here and one hand's there. And we help students understand you can't sort through those defense and judge the angle of the elbow during the choke when someone's choking the life out of you to decide which defense you want to go to. So it's very much about helping them understand how the system was conceived and developed as they get into the system. Otherwise, they're going to miss the point of it all.
Right. Exactly. I agree. Um, yeah, so that's neat. A turd event. I hadn't heard that one yet. Might use that one. Um, so do you have like or do you plan to have an online training course as well, or do you already do that with students? Or
Yeah, that's a great question, particularly today. I think for two reasons. Um, I don't feel like anything can take the place of the real-time feedback loop that happens in a classroom, right? But that doesn't mean it's the only way to learn something. In fact, when I started Krav Maga, I started with the videotapes in 1996, I think. I think that's when I purchased them. And I would just study what they were doing.
Mhm.
And if you have there was a book written years ago about how people become professional grade at anything. And one of the first requirements is the author called it ignition. So it's a biological need to belong to the group for whatever reason. For me, it was a biological need because I've been robbed at gunpoint and I thought the group had the solution for me, right?
Mhm.
But when you come across people who aren't doing this as a casual distraction, you can tap into that need, right?
Right.
That ignition. And when someone has that ignition, I believe you can do online courses. It's funny you ask, we're launching our first online course this summer. And we're calling the courses personal PhDs, right? So in the coaching parlance, I'm an unbeatable mind coach. In coaching parlance, a personal PhD is a 6-month intensive study
Mhm.
of something that is either new to you or the context is new, right? And the personal PhD that we're launching, or I'm launching this summer for online training, is striking in a self-defense context.
Okay.
Because if you think of striking as what you see in a Muay Thai, match, or in the UFC, or in a boxing ring, or PK, or any of those other things, you're missing the point. The striking has to be integrated into your Krav Maga, and the combinations you practice have to be developed in a way that supports and makes sense in a self-defense context. That sounds simple, but the thinking behind it is not, and the explanations around why we're doing this are actually pretty deep. And what I did was I did a pilot project with an advanced group, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, we got to do this." And when I explained the maturation or the evolution from striking to striking for self-defense, and helped them to integrate, they thought it was just crazy. And this all started from this simple idea: if you're under stress
Mhm.
and you're trying to go to control, or you've turned the tables, or you're no longer in a position of disadvantage, but you need to strike someone, how are you going to do that? And my personal opinion is the broad Krav Maga philosophy of be super aggressive and hit them isn't specific enough. I understand where the concept comes from, because you can't think about or script, distance and angle and things like that. I understand that.
Mhm.
But you can simplify it for students. And that's what we're doing in this personal PhD. It's called All Striker. And it's really about how do you integrate combatives and combinations that make sense in a self-defense context into your self-defense. And what we call it for short is these combinations are called push-play combinations. And everyone will say, what does push-play mean? I'll say, well, it's essentially someone grabs you, you have to start striking, and you push play, and the rest just happens. The music just starts, right? So repetition is also a piece of that, right? So Bruce Lee said, and I'm not endorsing him or not, but Bruce Lee once said, if you're the man that's done, one technique 1,000, 10,000 times, as opposed to the man that's done 10,000 techniques, right? So getting rid of some of the striking that's really not self-defense oriented and doesn't make sense for self-defense, and then using particular strikes to move through different ranges, and being able to use those strikings, those combinations in self-defense, is actually a complicated issue. So it's a
So
long answer,
what's
but yeah,
yeah,
we have some
no,
online
no.
stuff going.
Yeah, no, that's definitely an interesting concept. So what sort of striking would you deem as not appropriate for self-defense, or is that, or are you saying that that's a very personal thing for each
Well,
person?
that's a great question because there is a personal aspect to it. If you're a person who's not super vertical, right? Who's short, um, the striking for you might be different. It might be different because of the targets you can reach based on the range you're in, right? So the elements of that. But there are also a lot of elements around what strikes in self-defense don't make sense and what do. I'll give you two examples just to kind of
Mhm.
whet your appetite. We don't do uppercuts.
Okay.
We don't do uppercuts on that because if you do a combination, when you do a left uppercut or right uppercut, you actually lose a half a beat in recovery because you're no longer going forward, you're going up and down and then forward again, right?
Right.
So when I explain this to my students, I say, I'm not saying uppercuts aren't bad or bad strikes. I'm not saying they're not effective. I'm saying in a self-defense context, when you're driving yourself into the fight and you're trying to stop this fight in 5 seconds, like we talked about in intro class or less, and you have to do maximum damage, an uppercut is not going to make the list of things that you need to do to be successful, right?
Mhm.
Then I'll say simple things, and we can use fighting as a proxy to understand in the context of a simple combative what combatives are most effective.
Right.
And it's not going to surprise you. You probably know that the right straight and the left hook are responsible for more knockouts than any of their punches.
Mhm.
There's not a third punch that even makes the list. So the third punch responsible for the most knockouts is a well-timed counterattack, right? And it's possible that we're doing counterattacks in self-defense, but not probable, right? I teach my students to roll. I teach my students to slip. I teach my students to pull. But are they going to do that in a self-defense situation? And the answer is
Probably.
probably not. And if you're doing that self-defense situation, what else could you do that would be more facilitate or expedite the outcome you're looking for? So when we really are honest with ourselves about self-defense, there are things we'd like to do, but there are better things we probably should be doing. I'll
That,
give you
yeah, that
my
makes sense.
students like left hooks. I love left hooks. It's a self-defense situation. It's probably better to do a left power slap than a left hook
Mhm.
because a left power slap is longer. So you don't have to step in off the right straight. You can stay where you are. It also facilitates hand fighting, where if they cover, you can pull the hand out and throw spear elbows or other types of combatives. So this is the type of thinking that goes into a curriculum where the combinations are designed specifically for the context of self-defense.
Yeah, no, I definitely like that because I've always felt that that in a lot of Krav training, the the combatives is just about aggression, but but very I've been to very few trainings where they talk about taking the combatives and really, what are your targets? What are you actually hitting? It's more like, okay, you do this defense and then do combatives. It's like, but it's sort of been combatives have sort of been pushed aside, and I don't know whether that's just because it's not as cool as the actual self-defense, but well, at least in my opinion, combatives are more important than self-defense because there's no way a person should even get to a sort of choke or a hold on you, right? If you're properly seeing things coming, and your combatives should be there before the self-defense even begins. So is this about making getting rid of the, so if I'm getting this right, it's getting rid of the combatives that don't make sense, right? And getting each person to commit to, or to figure out which combatives are best for them, and then really work on them to master them, master how they deal them, how they will target them, and how they fit into their overall self-defense regime.
Yeah, that's part of it. I would say, self-defense and combatives or combinations, striking are two sides of the same coin, right? They can't really exist without each other.
Yeah.
If you have self-defense without effective combatives, it's not helpful. If you have combatives without self-defense and you get caught in a position of disadvantage, it's not helpful, right?
Mhm.
So if you think about it this way, I'll give you an example. I asked my students, why would you ever start a combination with a left-right combination? So left jab or left straight, right? Or what is the goal of doing that? So they throw out things like, well, you want to strike them, and then you want to set them up, or you want to measure. And so what they're telling me is they're giving me the idea of a left-right combination in the context of fighting.
Right.
I'm using a left straight to measure, and I'm using my right straight to follow up once he covers and opens back up to see what I'm doing. That's all true. But in self-defense, why do we throw certain combatives? And there's really only two answers in my view. The first answer is we throw combatives outside of landing them, right? The other reason we throw them is to move the defense around, to move the defense where we want it. So if we're not successful, our next strike in the combination will be successful, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when people, and I've asked classrooms and this is hard because Darren used to this too, he'd ask this question and he's thinking of a specific answer, and there are 200 answers that could be right if you've ever done that before.
Yes, I've had instructors like that. You're like, oh, which one does he want?
Yeah, and it's just contextual, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea of it being so many potential answers and then having this specific answer really draws you into it, right? So no one has ever said the reason of throwing a left straight, right straight, left power slap is to move the defense around. No one's ever said that. And if there's not a defense, just keep going. But if there is a defense and there are instinctive responses, as you know, then what we're doing is moving the defense around. So I said, that's why we don't throw left straight, right straight, left straight, right straight, left straight, right straight over and over again, because the defense is going to be set there at some point. So we start with fundamental ideas around what are we doing and why are we doing it, and what is the context for self-defense? What is a high line? What is a low line? Why does it matter? Right? What's a line? What's a path? How are those combatives different? Why do we use them? And so begin to explore these things with students, and they get a rich knowledge. And then to go to the last point you made, which is getting rid of or keeping combatives, assume that you have a quiver of arrows. There's only so many arrows you can fit in that quiver, right?
Right.
And so the philosophy for me is I could teach 20 different strikes. Or I could limit, I'm just going to give you an example, I could limit us to 7 strikes that make up a series of combatives, push-play combinations that are effective over a very broad range of self-defense scenarios. And anytime I can simplify something for a student, that's what I want to do.
Nice. All right. Well, that's you know what, you've got my interest on this topic, right? So it's yeah, oh, it's definitely cool. And you said this course is launching this summer?
Yep, it's going to launch in July. We haven't nailed the date down. What we're going to do is we're going to have online and online in person. The online group that's not available to be in Houston will do the same training, and we'll have video-based trainings. We'll probably run it through a Facebook group or some other type of group, and we'll have Zoom meetings where we discuss questions, explore concepts, make sure everybody understands specifically why we're doing what we do. I'll go back to this again. No matter what you teach somebody, in my view, you have to make sure that they have asked all the questions that they need to ask. And people that come from traditional martial arts backgrounds and find Krav Maga typically won't ask questions because that's not something you do. You don't question your instructor, right?
Right.
And what I tell my students is this: if you have a question about Krav Maga, I don't care what it is, I can answer it. I've been doing Krav Maga 20-something years. It's the way I make my living. You can ask me, why do we do this specific thing in this specific defense? I'll have an answer for you. And the reason is I don't teach anything that doesn't have a reason for being. I don't teach something because it's cool. In fact, during the Christmas holidays, I have the 12 days of Christmas with my advanced class, and I'll come in for 12 classes in a row and teach them really cool stuff that comes from jujitsu, that comes from Junfan or Kung Fu or Jiu-Jitsu or Jeet Kune Do, that comes from Blink to Walk, that comes from American boxing, a number of different martial disciplines, right? Silat. And I'll teach them. And for 12 days during the holidays, they get all this stuff that's incredibly awesome and sexy and has nothing to do with self-defense. So
Nice.
12 days out of the year, they get to learn this stuff and then throw it away. And what that does is that shows, so we do I teach it, they do it, they go, this is really cool. And I go, okay, here's why this is not helpful for you. And what that does is that expands thinking. And it also reinforces the idea that the things we do for a reason. And all the things outside of that sphere that exist that are awesome and cool, and they are awesome and cool, they're just not contextually what we're looking for. I'm not down on jiu-jitsu. It's a fantastic skill. I'm not down on Blink to Walk or Kung Fu or karate or any of those. There's a place for them. And I think they're all fantastic. I love martial arts. I love martial systems. I love martial science. But to be true to Krav Maga and to make my students safe, I have to really think about what's the simplest way to do this and in the context in which they're going to operate.
Nice. Well, you'll definitely like that 12 days of Christmas. That's neat. So I want to thank you for being on. Right.
Thank you.
And definitely let us know when you plan on launching that course, because I'm sure I'm assuming it's open to everybody, right? Or is it only open to certain groups of people?
No, my philosophy is that everyone has a right to self-defense. I don't care who you are, where you're from, or what you do, or I don't care about the color of your skin or your religion, or those are personal choices and things that we're born with. What I want to do is make sure if someone wants to be safe, if someone wants to learn a critical life skill, that I'm a resource for them. So yeah, absolutely open to everybody.
Perfect. So you'll have to let us know when it officially launches so that we can post it up in our community as well. And hopefully people will take advantage of that, and I might check it out as well.
Super.
And if anyone's in Houston, what's the best way? We're going to post up all your information anyway, but what's the best way to get in contact with you? Is it email or is it phone? Just drop by the studio, one of the studios?
Yeah, you can drop by a studio. I'm typically at a studio in central Houston, and the phone there is 713-526-2500.
Awesome. Well, I'd definitely like to have you back on at some point. This was a very interesting conversation, and you're also an editor for Kravology as well.
I started Cravology.com years ago. Yeah. And that was that's really more about talking to people who are in Krav Maga so that the background and context is already there.
Yeah, perfect. And maybe next time we can talk a little bit about that. But anyway, thank you for being on, and have a great week, and hopefully we'll connect again soon.
That sounds great. Thank you.
All right, no problem.
God bless. Take care.
You too. All right.